Yeah. All right. Welcome, folks. Thank you for coming. I'm Suresh. I'm the interim director of DSI and also one of the two co-hosts of our first Data Matters seminars of the fall semester. So the idea of Data Matters is a deliberate play on words. We at DSI recognize that data does matter, but there are lots of matters around data. And then we run this seminar, we've been running it now for like a year or two now, where we bring people from all across campus and sometimes beyond to talk about what matters to them regarding data and so on. And so thank you for coming here today. We'll probably be doing more of these. We'll be doing more of these events, and if you're here, that means you know how you're on the right mailing list or the right notifications to get them for the next one. And we'll be announcing that as well. I know we have a couple of cute ones queued up already for later this semester. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague Holly Case, who is going to talk about this new program, this Collaborative Humanities Lab that the two of us are embarking on. Holly.
Thanks everyone for coming and for those tuning in online. We're rolling out this project over the next week here, first at Data Matters, but also on Monday we'll have a mixer at the new Cogut Institute building at Andrew's house, to which you're most welcome, and I'll make that announcement more later. So I'd just like to talk a bit about how this came about, first of all, this collaboration between myself and Suresh, what it means and where we're going insofar as we have fixed answers to that question. For my own purposes, it goes back to January of 2020 when I was in a village in the Czech Republic doing a winter school on the subject of scale. And it really blew my mind. And it got me thinking about how my own discipline treats the matter of scale and how other disciplines do as well, because a lot of the readings were from various disciplines, and it occurred to me that a lot of the methods within our disciplines have not been able to account for some of the changes that are the result of technology that has brought to the matter of scale. And so I became interested in it, and partially as a result of that, and partially as a way to inform myself, which I know that one shouldn't experiment on human subjects, but I did that in two different formats. One is I raked a couple of computer scientists into an AI, very informal AI reading group. And together with Ellie Fall, who some of you may know, but also someone from neuroscience from ASEA, and Govind Menon from Applied Math, and eventually Lindsay Kaplan from art history, and we had occasional people drifting through in and out. Lachlan was one of them, is. And this reading group was a sort of tortured core of trying to see, well, what can we talk about around the subject of AI? And some things were incredibly difficult, and some things were easy, but then we became suspicious of how easy they were. And a lot of times it was just incredibly interesting. Like one had the feeling like, oh, like something, it's possible to think new thoughts in this context. And so I think a certain four of us got very excited about it. And we continued doing it. I ended up teaching a history of AI course in 2021. Also, that was my other human subjects. And as a way to inform myself about, like how would you construe the history of this phenomenon with which we do now, and how have other people done it? How would I want to do it? And how would you think about the contributions of various disciplines to what we know of this AI? So that sort of deep background. And in the course of our discussions around AI in the reading group, we settled on a few concepts. Originally, it was models, abstraction, and scale. And then we discovered that abstraction covers pretty much everything. And as a historian, I should have had the third one originally, but it was actually Suresh who came up with the third one, and that was context. And how is context changing when we think context at scale? And so these three terms that we have now are models, context, and scale. And what we've sort of settled on is the things we're interested in, or how modes of thinking and methods within the various humanities disciplines have prefigured and shaped AI, things like symbolist poetry, debates around authorial intent, subaltern and post-colonial studies, the emergence of conceptual, transnational, and global history, but also methods and other disciplines that conceive of things at different scales. And these are often unintentional, but they have wide-ranging implications. So the short way of putting this is that we've sort of recognized that a lot of the methods of the humanities disciplines had found their way into the technologies that were conceptualized around machine learning and large language models coming from various disciplines. And so how had these methods been transmuted in that process, or how were we living with different versions of them because of that process? And alternatively, how do our own methods have to change because of the existence of AI? How do we conceive of methodological rigor in the age of AI, if you will? So those are kind of primary preoccupations and fields. I'm going to talk a bit about what we've done up until now. We invited a speaker named Megan Ojiblan, who gave a talk at the Cogut, and this was our first sort of collaboration with the Cogut. And Megan was a fascinating character who's written several books. She's a columnist for Wired magazine, and she came to talk about what does it mean for writers, and this was shortly after the emergence of ChatGPT-3, and also she had engaged with earlier versions of ChatGPT and had written on that subject, and she was reflecting on the effect of on first-person writers of these technologies. And it was a tremendously well-attended event, and we also had a lot of energy coming from the students who had very good questions and who were intrigued by some of the things that Ojiblan had to say. And that gave us a little encouragement that, okay, maybe it's not just us and who are interested in some of these themes. We also had two members of our informal reading group, Lindsay Kaplan and Lynn Menon, teach a course on form and formalism, and that was last fall. And this was a course that I've heard from various students how mind-changing it was to them. And this didn't grow, this grew out of the interactions within the reading group, but that's also very much the project that was conceived by Lindsay and Govind. And this is sort of what we see as one of the potentials for the lab, is as a kind of like starting conversations that can then become courses, publications, or other manifestations in this worldly world. Another is that we had a workshop on models of abstraction scale. You can see this is our 1.0 theme, but this is where the 2.0 was born. This was at the American Academy in Berlin, which where I was a fellow last fall. And so we had a workshop bringing together lots of people from around Berlin, but also from Brown. And we had very intense discussions over 2 days. And we also had a public panel, which Suresh participated on, in governing AI, where we also had a representative of the German Foreign Office, for example, someone from German Microsoft. And it was a public discussion outside of the more closed door workshop that we had alongside of it. In the spring of last year, Lachlan and I were both fellows at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, where there were also other, I wasn't a digital humanism fellow, but Lachlan was, and there were several others. And in the course of that spring, we had a number of informal and more formal conversations to continue. So this is sort of like the Viennese splinter group version. And while this was happening in Vienna, the group back at home hosted Wei Tung, who came to visit to talk about a text as part of the reading group. He was sort of a flash mob participant in the Here reading group. And this, I think, is heading towards another collaboration, and maybe Suresh can say a bit more about that. So I'd like to turn the floor over to Suresh, who will maybe talk more about our three themes. Yeah.
Thanks, Bobby. I have no slides, I'll just talk from here. As you can see, Holly's the maestro of weaving all of these threads together and getting different people in. So if you're not careful, you'll be roped into this. So maybe that's a good thing. So I'm very grateful that I was invited into the AI reading group when I first joined Brown, and I really enjoyed the discussion that we had, and you could sort of see all these concepts building up. So models, scales, and context. So I just want to talk a little bit about those three words and how we've been trying to think about what we want to do with them. So you saw the course that Lindsay and Will were teaching on form and formalism. I think it's a good example of how take a word like form or formal. Right? You talk to a mathematician or a computer scientist, we have some notion of what it means to be formal, what it means to have a formal zone. You talk to an art historian like Lindsay, you have a very different notion. It's one of those things where it's the same word, but it means many different things. When you unpack them, there are similarities, but also very interesting differences to poke at it. And just like Holly was saying, it seems like they're saying the same thing, but actually, wait a second. And I think this is the flip side of the usual jargon problem. You were talking about interdisciplinary work with a capital I. It's like, well, they're saying something I don't understand. I'm saying something you don't understand. I'm going to find a way to talk together. This is the flip side where it seems like the words are the same, but they sort of unpack a universe of meaning that we need to explore. And I think those three words we have, model, scale, and context, represent that. Right? So if you think of a model, right? I'm a computer scientist, I think a model, of course, now I think of machine learning models, a thing that makes predictions or a thing that generates like a large language model. But a model can be many things. If you're in biology, a model is like a model organism, right? So you want to study human biology, you find a model organism like a fly, a Drosophila, and you study that. That's your model. It's a model in the sense that it's a thing, a structure you can investigate, which gives you some facsimile at some distance removed from the actual thing you want to study, which is a human. You might think of, these books about the Asian immigration into the United States, the so-called model minority. There, the word model, of course, means something very different, about like some kind of idealized version, the perfect version. The model is the exemplar, the one that everyone should sort of aspire to be. I mean, in that book, of course, it's ironic. It's another story there. But this idea of the model as either the exemplar or just one of many. Think of the standard model of physics or a model of the universe. It's just something to sort of probe and inquire to get some sense of what's out there. They all mean different things. And I think one of the theme of the model, what we want to explore is what does it mean for something to be a model? What are you omitting when you come up with a model or something? What are you keeping? How do you decide what makes sense to keep within a model and what makes sense to throw out? Does your model have to get arbitrarily detailed? Is it a model any longer? It's not so detailed. It is the thing itself, right? If this is the model of this room, is it a model of a question like that, right? So these are things that we want to discuss. And again, it sort of came up, I think, organically through our discussion. It's like, wait a second, there's this word we don't fully quite grasp. And it was very interesting to see that moment of discovery with, there is this concept that we can now talk about in a common frame of reference that we bring different perspectives to. So that's models. Scale, again, as a computer scientist, we think of scale as like bigger. How do you make things work at scale? How do you build something and make it, how do you make your algorithm efficient so that if you have a gazillion points, you have to run around and run efficiently? That's how we think about it. And that's more or less how people think about things getting bigger. But then when you do that, you have to start thinking, okay, what happens are there things that you use at small scale that emerge at a larger scale? Those are emergent properties. In the context of AI, we're saying, ChatGPT has emergent behavior, or an LLM has emergent behavior only at a certain size. What does that mean for something to emerge at a certain size or not? What is the implications of scale from a point of view of sort of ethical use of systems? Is it okay to get bigger and bigger and bigger? Is there some consequence to that? Is there a reason why actually smaller might be better? I mean, should we be building, for example, small models that are customized towards a particular domain or a particular culture or a particular area, rather than building one giant model to serve all, so to speak? And of course, you can see the tension now between scales and models, right? Because the bigger you build something, maybe the less representative it gets, the less like a model becomes, or not. And so understanding those tensions, again, something that I suspect we'll have to explore. And finally, the issue of context, which again sort of relates to all of these, right? So we think of context as something that, at least I think of context as, well, a way of going away from the abstractions, that's a word again, the abstractions that we tend to use in computer science, towards something more specific, right? Rather than thinking of
the abstract chair, I think of this particular chair with this particular cushion on top with this color, and there's some meaning and value to thinking of this in its local context. One of the big discussions in the broader issues of AI governance and AI policy is how do we make sure that we are thinking about policies in the context of the group of the people who are being affected by it, not in some abstract sense. So this idea of what does it mean to add context, again, goes back to this question of, well, if you have a model that's too abstract, can you add context? From a computer science point of view, what is the best way you can insert context into a model that's abstract? We talk about, for example, alignment of AI systems, how to give them some sense of normative behavior. How do you put that in, that ethical context that you want? Again, I don't know the answer, and over the next 3 years, we'll be discussing all of these things. Yeah. But that's sort of the basic, these are some of the themes that came out from these discussions and the themes that we're hoping to explore as part of this sort of activity, sort of workshops, lectures, meetings, courses that we're going to be trying to do. I'll hand it back to Olga.
So I'm going to talk a bit about what our plans are for the shorter and longer term. In the shorter term, on Monday next, we have a mixer where we're bringing together, different groups on campus to talk about what they're doing with respect to, broadly speaking, digital humanities plus AI plus humanities approaches to the question, to some of the questions we've been talking about. And this is, in many respects, what we're doing has deep roots at ground, not with us, but with other organizations such as the library and CPS, Center for Digital Scholarship. But also there are a number of other people working in various fields with labs of their own. And so we're hoping to use this mixer as a way to introduce people to one another who are working in various fields and to see what are the ways that we can increase our productive interaction. And so if everyone is most welcome to attend. Here's the information, but that's going to be our next event. Also, with Lachlan Kermode, we're sitting right there, we have an informal philosophy of maths online reading group, which is quite small but robust. And we're planning what's colloquially known as a nano workshop coming up to see if we can pilot some ideas for possible written work. And on December 12th, we have Alison Parrish coming, who is a computer programmer, a poet, and a game designer, who has written and spoken and sort of produced in some of the fields that we're most interested in. We don't yet have a title for her talk because we just found out that she's coming this last week, but mark your calendars because we do know it's going to be December 12th and that there will be a format for her to interact with students, just with students. And so keep an eye out for announcements with respect to that. Also, Suresh and I will be team teaching a course, a lecture course, in fact, on the history of artificial intelligence. This is the 2.0 version of, and we always think when we're going to get together to discuss what we're going to talk about, that we'll talk about logistics, that we'll work out a plan. And this is what happens when Suresh and I get together. We always have, like logistics in sight, and then 3 hours later, yes, we've managed to talk about everything but the logistics. But that's been what's made these interactions truly enjoyable and also intellectually exciting. And so we're hoping to share some of that intellectual excitement in our class. And as we know that there are many students with an interest in this field, we hope to meet them where they live, but also with them go some other places. Mm-hmm. And finally, in the spring, Lindsay and Debbie Weinstein in American Studies are co-organizing together with the lab a models workshop, and this will be the first of 3. I think in spring we'll have the models workshop. Next year we'll probably do scale and then context in our year 3. because this is a sort of a 3-year humanities collaborative humanities lab, and it's actually the first one that the Cogut has funded, and so we're kind of back in 1.0 build there. But we've benefited a lot from interactions with institutions like CBS. Just today, I was meeting with Tara Numedal and Ashley Champagne, who have done so much on this campus to bring people together around these themes already. And so we look forward to collaborating with and adding to in the best way we can to this atmosphere. And we're also open to ideas or suggestions or for speakers or for activities. And we'll be rolling out some more stuff on Monday. So stay tuned, but please know that we're out there, i.e. in here, and that we're open to thoughts because we're at the very beginning of our mandate. And so it's an exciting time. Good, I think that's all. I'll just unplug this for me. Or do I need it for the Zoom?
No, it's okay because we have this.
Okay.
All right, so I guess we were going to just have a chat in front of you.
Yes.
But no, but we do want, we'd love to get questions. We have questions for each other.
Yeah.
That could go in many different places. So, what do you have questions to do?
Well, I did, but do you want to talk first?
I mean, no, please. Go
No,
ahead.
I was struck by something that Holly said, where that the humanities methods have been absorbed into AI. I think that's what you said. I just wondered what you meant by that. If you could give an example of the humanities methodology that has been taken up by AI.
Yeah, and here, I should say that I don't speak for the historical field. Maybe there are other people who construe things this way. So this is kind of an argument that I would like to make, and it's an argument that I would that came out of my observations from attending job searches in the DSI, and I would say, oh, that's interesting. That this idea has come through in that way. So, for example, the issue of authorial intent, which in the field of English is something that has been deeply interrogated to the point that authorial intent is oftentimes no longer considered the locus of proper consideration. And there's a whole methodological history that brings English to those conclusions. And it sort of tracks parallel to the emergence of behaviorism, for example, that is more interested in seeing like how something is going to act or behave in the world, and not how, not what it thinks on the inside, not the subjective universe that exists on the inside. And so, there's a convergence of conclusions about where the locus of an analytic stress should be around some version of sort of like vulgar behaviorism. I think this is an interesting convergence to me. And I see it also in my own field, for example, with the way that there was a very firm preoccupation with methodology in the 20th century. When we talk about the history of methodology, like we hammer hard on the mid-20th century because that's where a lot of the most intense discussions around historical method, the Annales school and micro history, macro history came out of. And there was a very intense series of discussions around method, a very intense search for methods that would be effective for history. And a lot of that, if you look at Ngram charts on method in 3 different languages that are sort of the global languages for academic purposes, you see they go like this, like that mid-century they peak and then they taper off. So what happened to method? It's interesting that at the very same time that, philosophers of math like Paul Feyerabend have said, against method, he publishes that work, that disciplines like history stop being preoccupied with method because they have gotten, they've taken down the boundaries between history and the other disciplines, like the notion that you would take in insights from anthropology, from psychology was already absorbed. And so at the very moment when method expands, it also disappears in a way. And I find this disappearance interesting for thinking about, okay, what has also disappeared into the machine? And I actually think it hasn't disappeared entirely, but part of what we've done with it is we've short-coded it. So a lot of method is packed into our terminology. Like when we use a word like imperialism, when we use a word like Anthropocene, there's an entire method that's built into that word. And every time we use it, we're collapsing a very large-scale phenomenon of simultaneities across multiple contexts into a single term. And in that respect, it's not so different than what happens in other fields, even though I think it seems a lot different. But when we are thinking about simultaneous actions in multiple contexts, and our terminologies imply that, then there is part of the discipline that has relinquished a conception of context as here, now, very situated in a particular place in a particular time, which is the way that the discipline construes of its activity more broadly. So a lot of this has just gotten me thinking. That was a long answer. So that'll teach you to ask,
But I wanted to flag one point.
I get the convergence, but what I don't get is the idea that the methodologies that were sort of producing those developments of intellectual developments were adopted by people working there.
Not self-consciously. No, a lot of this is, yeah. So I agree. It's not a self-conscious adoption. It is a true convergence, and a convergence that makes the disciplines less able to critique each other on terms they hitherto have, and that to me is where things get interesting.
I want to riff off this for a second. You mentioned authorial intent, and you mentioned how that the evolution of how people think of the value of authorial intent has changed. I think of this now because, weirdly enough, and I see echoes of this whenever we talk about what a large language model does, and does it have an internal state? Is it thinking when it produces some text, or should we be evaluating what it does based purely on its output and not based on any need to reason about its internal state, or if it has an internal state, or if it's conscious? These are all discussions that are kind of being waved around right now in the context of AI. Some of them are, discussions that I think are very old, that have always been around as long as AI has been around. But some of them are new and also kind of pertinent because they're being used. This is where I put my policy hat on. They're being used to decide how we should regulate these systems. Literally to the end of, well, if an AI system is conscious and has a mind, then does it have rights? And no, I mean, these are, you can take the line of thought and think it through, but I think but it seems to boil down to questions that we're not yet able to answer about what it means to exhibit and show intent of various kinds. So just that example of, I don't want to, I don't know where this is going, but these are the kind of riffs that come up when we have these conversations. I feel like they're worth exploring in some level.
Yeah, and the law is interesting in that regard, and you and I have also talked a lot about the law, because part of what makes that, move to thinking, does it have rights, is, that we have segments of the law that, that are that lead a pounce in that direction. So the law doesn't have a lot of terms for contemplating, or it has its own terms for contemplating new technologies of the future. And when it comes to something like sentience, it does, like the law's tools, if you will, oftentimes go from one to the next towards something like rights or criminal responsibility.
Right.
And especially when it comes to the question of intent, because the law is preoccupied with the matter of intent. Did it mean to do this? And so establishing, criminal intent in legal settings is absolutely crucial. And so there are a lot of these structures that we have that are not part of, the way that people who design LLMs or other, technologies are thinking, but they are part of the way the reception world, the interpretive world, it's part of the way they land.
Yeah,
mean, maybe just to pick up on this thread here as well. I mean, I think there are interesting ways in which practitioners who are building LLMs or building different softwares and that sort of thing are kind of rediscovering theories in the humanities or debates in the humanities around like if the statistical production of the next word is all that an LLM is doing, does this count as thinking or is this valid as language? And I think this is bringing a lot of sort of like tech people, for example, who haven't necessarily thought about this or encountered this problem before in such a serious way to discussion in the philosophy of language and this kind of thing. So, I mean, one, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but
Bingo card.
but I do think that there's this interesting way that the computer science is kind of, and data people are starting to look outwards in the sense of trying to look to the humanities to answer some of these questions. Do either of you have particular thoughts or examples of that is the case in your own experience and where you think the kind of most interesting ways in which these cross?
I mean, I can speak for myself at least that for me, and when I teach some of the concepts around, at least historically, for example, how we've historically tried to manage new technologies and put rules around their use and what those lessons can tell us about the moment we're in right now. Just being able to tell students, not all of this is brand new. Not all of AI is sui generis. There's things we can learn from the past that are actually relevant to our current moment. And then having them realize, and myself realize, yeah, there in fact are useful lessons from the days of the Jacquard loop, from the days of the early days of statistical testing, the early days of eugenics that are both cautionary tales as well as signs for how people might come together to react to the disruption of new technology, the world of STS in particular. I think that has been for me, and hopefully for the students I talk with, very useful is to put this in perspective, to get some sense of, I can kind of see where these discussions are going. This is a version of, it's not exactly the same, but a version of discussions you've seen before. And that will also tell us where we might need to go and how we might need to present our things. So that's a bit abstract, but I think in the context of eugenics, it's been very powerful. I remember sort of saying, I remember in my class, I was teaching class and people were saying, well, it's just machine learning, what can we can't do anything about it. I said, well, we used to have, it was just statistics, and then it led to this. And then people said, okay, this is ridiculous. We cannot just say, well, it's just stats. We have to draw a line and say, no, there are certain normative moral positions we are going to take, and we're going to say that's sorry. And we can do that now too. So I think that idea that it is actually possible for us to take positions and make assessments about how technologies are impacting us, that there is a permission to do so from the past, has been very helpful. So if that's, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It's got me thinking in a bunch of different directions. But I'm glad you mentioned eugenics because this goes to the matter of touching ground. I think where the dangers of interdisciplinarity interaction, like finding terms, abstract terms like models, scale, and context, and then meeting around those. One of the dangers is that you stay in the realm where you have a common language, and you don't touch ground. And the areas where the disciplines have those common languages are precisely the ones where you have to be extra careful to touch ground regularly and as a matter of course. Yeah, because for John von Neumann, touching ground meant computer programming. Like touching a computer, like that was his touching ground because it was like different from set theory.
It's the same thing.
But so touching ground is not the same in all contexts. And so I think, thinking about impact and thinking about people and thinking about specific sort of story trajectories, but also, very particular events. And part of the challenge here is, and one of the ones where I think the romance of such interactions and where you see, someone thinking about technology in a way that, that can be very exciting to feel those connections. And also there's a lot of sci-fi that comes into that. There's a lot of hacker ethic. There's a lot of romance, and there are some very interesting theories like that that have, you know, like fascinating kind of theses about how things work, like Mackenzie Wark's Hacker Manifesto, for example. That's a very interesting historical text. And but where I think the challenge is with these fields is that abstraction allows for anything. It is too fecund. It is too rich. And so part of thinking rigor in our time is about how do you think about limiting the, you know, not some of abstractions, you know, like potential, but limiting its drug-like qualities, if you will. And also repeatedly, and as a matter of course, bringing abstractions into conversation with the ground, with the places and people and institutions and events that are being affected. And I think as these technologies develop, the tendency to remain in abstract realms will become stronger. And one of the things we were talking about over lunch when we should have been talking about logistics was about, like, could we have a conversation about, you know, like, yes, but where AI technologies do not belong? Like, you know, what would a conversation like that look like? And could one come up with some, you know, kind of thoughts about yes here, no there, or yes then, no now, or some to have that other conversation rather than always just how and, you know, like how fast. But especially with technologies of the past, it's often the case that they are sort of given, you know, runaway capacity initially, and then they're put in a lane eventually. And are there some insights we can glean from past trajectories to think about, okay, can we prevent them from destroying, you know, half the countryside before we arrive at a conclusion like, maybe cars should be on roads. Just a thought. Yeah.
I mean, this is also very interesting because, you know, a thing that is a recurring theme in computer science, right, is that to understand fully the properties of a thing you're building, whether it's a machine or even an algorithm or the problem trying to solve, is you have to understand what you can do and also what you cannot. But this idea of proving limits on what you can do is a core notion in computer science and mathematics as well. Right? You know, the first example that you can't trisect an angle with compass and scale is essentially a proof saying what you cannot do with certain sort of tools. And in computer science, we have been, at least in the past, used to doing this on a regular basis. We understand by understanding the limits. And right now with machine learning, we're in that expansive stage right now where it seems like literally the universe is the limit. There's no limit. There always is, but we're not kind of psychologically ready to inquire about it. And it feels like we need to inquire to understand the limits of the system. Just to say, as you said, where if not where should we not use it, where we cannot use it, where it isn't important. We don't have the answers to that yet. So that's a profitable discussion to have.
I have a question. It's pretty predictable for someone in a position like mine. You talk beautifully about the content and themes that you're going to use in courses and workshops. I'm interested in pedagogy. And so you could talk about AI, signature pedagogy on that, but I wonder if you could also focus on, it sounds like you're pretty intentional about having this be a transdisciplinary conversation, or perhaps an interdisciplinary conversation. So how are you thinking around pedagogical approaches that we use to mobilize that?
We talk about how we try to construct a class.
Yeah. Who do you want to sort of start off?
I mean, I'll start with my thought on how we're trying to construct classes. We'll see if Holly agrees with me on that. So this is Holly's class that, you know, we talked before, and that we're sort of doing a 2.0 as we described it, right? This 2.0 is always sometimes not. So the conceit in my head, at least, coming to this as a computer scientist, is like, in all the themes that, you know, we broke down for the class, and if I could look it up here, probably will be telling someone, I think, about a language, about, you know, what it means to be human,
what it means to, what are some of the other themes we had? With humanist language, we had intelligence. You think of that as a word, humanness or identity, language, or as a theme, a human as a theme. Sorry? And being embodied versus not. There is a rich literature from the humanities that talks about different aspects of these from the past with different notions of machines and humans. And there's a discussion in all of these happening right now under the surface of the latest argument about what ChatGPT can do and not do. And it's kind of uncanny how each of these themes are showing up right now. So my conceit is, can we connect that broad literature to the moment we're in right now, the discussion we're having right now? So the next time someone goes on, unnamed social media single letter platform and sees debates about this, they can kind of bring a context, there's a word again, context to that discussion, informed by discussions that have been had for, in some cases, hundreds of years. So that's, I don't know if that's pedagogy, but that's like an attempt to bring that. That's what I think we're hoping in this transdisciplinary brings together. Not here's my reading and your reading. It's more like here's how these are informing each other. I don't know if you want to add.
No, I think we have other questions.
Go ahead.
When Suresh was summarizing what you meant by scale, you talked about emergence as a key thing, which of course large language models and so demonstrated a lot of interest there. But there's also other notions of scale, like as you know, like it also changes your data distribution. So I try a proof of concept study in practice using Rhode Island medical data.
Yep.
And then once I think I have progress, now I move to the US.
Yep.
But at no point did I consider anyone else anywhere else in the world. And
Yep.
there's no notion in which I can randomly sample all medical,
Yep.
right? And so I'm wondering, I'd like to hear what you think about that, but also to connect to Holly, particularly as you expand this into the humanities. If I think about medical data, I'm kind of imagining there's constant patients coming through the system and I'm sort of getting new data. Humanities, I don't really necessarily get to pick my data. Like if it's historical, there's these artifacts, that's what there is. So I'm wondering what you're thinking in terms of scale. This thing that seems like a neutral concept, how many data points do I have, is actually carrying this implicit choice of who contributes, who gets to get into my model, who am I actually thinking about? Sort of scale as itself a value judgment. I'm wondering what you think of that.
This is actually, it's a problem for historians as well, and not just historians. I mean, historians do draw on historical data sets because there are historical statistics, and increasingly a lot of them are being digitized. Like the manifest for ships bringing new immigrants or slave ships, and so there are. That's just one example. And economic data for various periods and times. And the historian also there has to make decisions about, like what is the scope and scale, but also some of those decisions are made for the historian because of the lack of data. And I think there's another area in which scale becomes a matter for the historian, and that is like when one is looking at phenomena that look similar across different contexts at either different times or at the same time. Like what are the, like can one perceive this as a scalar phenomenon? Does one think then in terms of the structures that are conditioning these possibilities at scale? And a lot of that is sort of like reverse engineering from other sources, contacts between people across different areas where you can see this idea traveled here, but also to, like if there are laws and trade practices or particular materials shipping that would mean that you would have the same kind of bricks and the same kind of layout for streets in Vietnam and Poland, like that you would just you would try to glean from the given examples what the causal factors behind that convergence would be. And so you would sort of get to scale from the back end. You would see something operating and try to figure out whether it's because there's a scalar phenomenon at play or for other reasons entirely, because it's a diffusionist or whatever story, which might have some similarities to actually medicine, because you can imagine some things coming through a medication or a vaccine that a lot of people are taking, or from like a disease that travels from one person to the next. And so there's the one that is the simultaneous, and then there's the one that's the sequential, but some similar effects might be produced as a result. That you would have to sort of parse, is it the one or is it the other? And I think, for the case of historians at least, some of those problems adhere. My question would be, well, this is, I don't know, I really enjoy interacting around these things. I'd be keen to hear like what you see as, like, okay, then what's the next thing? Or what can we think beyond this? Or like, let's say we have these methods that we can compare, or that we can say, yes, we have something comparable, or no, we don't have something comparable. Are we speaking to the rigor of each other's fields? Are we touching upon something in one field or another where we have tacit assumptions about what constitutes a rigorous argument that might be calling for revision? And so that's what's exciting to me about interactions such as these, and about questions such as yours, and which I like a lot.
Hey, one more sort of this. I'm not logistical, but so we're gonna be doing for 3 years. I mean, let's see myself. We're trying to figure out what that means to this for 3. What will it mean to me? And I was thinking, folks in the room were interested. How do we want to invite people into sort of organize? Have we figured out yet how to invite people in to organize events that we can help sort of probably even capitalize?
Yeah, no, and that's one of the ways that we thought of, like we had this in our initial interactions through this reading group. And one of the things that we're pretty sure of is that we don't have a lock on all of these matters, and that we would like others to feel encouraged to try to develop their own. Like, I would like us to be a lab of labs, if you will, like where different ideas, people feel like they can try different ideas out. So one of the things we're going to encourage and ideally incentivize is for people to form their own reading groups around themes that are relevant to this, like interdisciplinary, and to come up with, because also I feel like others may get farther or have more like a refinement of the conceptualization, or an addition, or say, like, no, if you're contemplating this, you will never reach X or Y, So I think one of the things that we are pretty sure of is that we're not the only ones thinking about these things, but that we also don't want to be. And we would like to think with others, like if anyone here has an idea for a reading group, either with us or with a group of your own design, let us know, because we are we like to learn about these things, and we like to learn what's going on and what you're curious about.
We should call them flash labs.
Flash labs.
But yeah, I think we're also, just like the question you raised on medical, is there something interesting to explore in that space? I'm not putting a thing on you to sort of think about it, but I think we would like to invite ideas from folks here thinking about this. Just come to us and say, I'd like to organize something. Can you facilitate that? We have a lab, we have resources of the kind, and we can help facilitate those kinds of discussions happen, where you go off and do the wonderful thing and we help them. It's called outsourcing. So next, sorry.
I guess so. I enjoyed. Thank you for doing this whole thing. But when it comes to AI, of course, there's like in a lot of things, split between like the skeptics and the boosters. And I'm hearing a lot here is about kind of on the skeptic side, right? Like, how do we control? How do we think about? What are the issues? I'm wondering kind of what you're thinking more on the booster side. That is, what is AI? How can it be transformative for the field of history or the humanities fields, and vice versa?
Good question. I think we're both kind of skeptics, and
Yeah.
that's why this comes across.
Yeah. But I actually think that there are a lot of people doing very interesting work here who are, UPS and who have other labs like Kim Gowan, or you know, like a bit skeptic also, but and no one will also who uses it for like kind of beats making and rapping, so I think there are or digital publications. I also think that there's been some experimentation with like reconstructions for the purposes of thinking about history in terms of like reconstruction, and I think there's this is a field in which a lot of flowers should should bloom, and I would like to be in interaction with people who are thinking about those things, because I think one can't isolate one's interests. And if I were to say like where I have a boosterish vein, it's in some of the thinking around AI that I find it incredible, and that's sort of like why we're here, is that it touches upon so many things that are so fundamental to, like as Lindsay Kaplan always says, this goes back to the big questions of what it means to be human in a very visceral and immediate way. And it reopens questions that were sort of, that have been periodically closed. And so if I have a boosterism, it's around this moment where finally again, like it's possible to talk about some of the big questions and to talk about them with people from a broad range of perspectives and disciplines. And I find that just personally incredibly exciting. And so this is sort of a meta boosterism.
I'm getting confused though. But I think this Holly's point is a good point, right? That we think of a lot of when we talk about AI and the opportunities, we talk about application. So AI is a tool. We will use it here, and it will turbocharge this, it'll turbocharge that, it'll make that work better. And that's all real. That's all that stuff is very real. And yes, there's a lot of work already going on, right? But there's also the other way around, right? AI is, as you said, opening up discussions where we can do more thinking. We can think more deeply about and make sense of questions in a new light around intelligence, around humanness, around identity, around embodiment. And that is exciting in itself. But I think part of what we're trying to sort of foster, I feel like the application side is happening already. But maybe we're seeing less of this side, the boostering side of the making sense of it all. And that's what we're trying to promote as well. So it's not, I don't think it's so much of a skeptic lens, it's more like a different lens and that goes beyond, that is different from let's apply it here, let's apply that, which is also very interesting.
Doesn't need this.
Sorry?
It doesn't need this.
That's a different story. I think yeah.
No, I mean, I'm not being skeptical.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, in actual historical reality, no need to use.
So thank you all for coming. I mean, so next week at Cogut in Andrews Hall. Yeah. So today we were on my turf. Next time we're on Cody's turf. We're gonna have a mixer there. If any of you
Better food there.
It starts now. So but if you there'll be other discussions happening there, other presentations. I think Sydney will do a video.
Yeah,
Skybetter, director of BAI, will send a video on what they're doing there. So if you have the chance to come along, see the new building. And we saw 5:30 September 30th.
Yes.
Cool. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
That's good. Thanks so much for doing this.
I figured it'd be easy just to check.